Hi, everyone, and welcome to our conversation this evening. We're hoping this is going to be the first of many conversations with the bishop, and I'm going to allow the bishop to say a little bit more about that in a second. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Fight for 15 and Fairness campaign, which is kind of a national, maybe even international program, but we're going to be talking about the expression of it here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So we do have Bishop Sam Rose with us this evening, and also Mark Nichols, who is the community organizer for the Fight for 15 and Fairness campaign, Newfoundland and Labrador. I think this conversation has taken on added significance here in Newfoundland for two reasons. One is obviously the pandemic, because we all know that in the first lockdown, and again now, we have essential workers who are out there working for a minimum wage, which is really in this province a poverty wage. And so the words essential and poverty should not go together. So our sense of this has been heightened here in this province. But also the other thing was Snowmageddon, where again, you had, at least here in the metro area, almost a complete lockdown, but still essential workers out there working for less than a living wage. And so that's really, aroused people's attention on this topic. And so our conversation tonight is going to be around the church's response to this whole 15 and Fairness campaign. So I'm going to shut up right now. I'm going to be in the background. I'm going to be watching the live streams. If people want to make comments or post questions, I can pass those along where appropriate to Bishop Sam and to Mark. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bishop Sam, and he's going to lead the conversation.
Thank you, Reverend Robert, for this opportunity tonight, and thank you for organizing this event. We were planning to do this a couple of weeks ago, and of course, the lockdown happened, but we didn't want to have it 2 weeks ago for the simple reason is that we wanted to make sure that this was given the appropriate attention. Even though we're still in lockdown, it's certainly a time for us to consider this campaign and to learn a little bit more about the $15 for Fairness campaign. And I'm very appreciative to Mark for being in here and offering himself to answer some questions from the bishop, which is my intention tonight, to just simply ask some questions to learn a little bit more about this campaign and to ask him sort of direct questions around what does this mean for the church in the response to what he's talking about, and how should Christians respond to this sense of this issue around poverty and a fair living wage. As a clergy and as a faith leader, I've seen firsthand how people working minimum wage jobs struggle on a daily basis to make ends meet, to put food on the table, to buy clothes for children, to pay their bills, and that's even though they're working 40 hours a week, making minimum wage. People often have to work 2 or more jobs in order to make ends meet. And of course, because of that, that means they have very little time for themselves or for their families. They're simply just trying to work to live, and that causes a lot of other strains in family life and personal life. Many people are working minimum wage jobs. Often they lack medical benefits, for example, or healthcare benefits. And from a personal perspective, I have had family members who spent their whole life working minimum wage in their careers, who unfortunately got sick and had to go on social assistance in order to have their medical bills and medication covered. And not just as a bishop, but as a human being, that just doesn't seem right here in this country, that people would have to leave their job in order to have their medication covered. So for me, minimum wage, my experience that minimum wage is not the same as a living wage. So when I learned that one of my priests, which is Mark Nichols, has taken up this new position with Common Front NL as an advocate for the $15 minimum wage in this province, I wanted to learn more about his work I want to thank Mark, who is, as you know, a community organizer for the Fight for $15 and Fairness campaign. I know him better as Father Mark. And full disclosure, about, I don't know, a couple of months ago, guys, I came out and spent 2 hours in the wonderful cold weather as you collected petitions for this event at St. Mark's Church. And I asked a lot of questions at that time, and we've met since then and sort of asked more questions. So I thought it's a wonderful opportunity to let everybody in on my questions and your responses. So Mark, thank you so much for doing this evening. And just tell me a little bit more about the $15 and for Fairness and Fairness movement, if you can.
Thank you, Bishop. Well, the 15 Fairness movement began in 2012 in New York City with restaurant workers who walked off the job pushing for a higher minimum wage. And that movement has spread to other cities across the US. Down in the US, there's a national minimum wage. States can have a minimum wage as long as it's not lower, and cities can have minimum wages. So it's spread to a number of cities. And then it spread into Canada, to Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia. And in 2018, it was started here by Common Front NL. So it's been on the go now for a good 3 years in this province. And it's had success in other places. There's a number of cities in the US that have a $15 minimum wage or higher now, in one state, if I'm not mistaken. And in Alberta, we have a $15 minimum wage. And in British Columbia, come June 1st, they will be at $15.20 an hour. So, and Nunavut, the territory of Nunavut is $16 an hour. So it is, in other jurisdictions are adopting it. It's just, it's been a bit of a fight here.
So who are the people you're advocating on behalf of?
Well, some people think it's simply minimum wage workers, right? So those folks who are making whatever the legislated minimum wage at any point in time. But the reality is we're actually fighting for the low wage workers in our province. So the Newfoundland and Labrador Statistics Agency defines a low wage worker as somebody making $15 an hour or less. And so in 2019, that's the last year I have the numbers for, there were 48,900 low-wage workers in this province. So people earning $15 or less, all of whom who would benefit from a $15 minimum wage to varying degrees. And that constituted in that year 23% of our workforce. So almost 1 in 4 workers.
So what's our current minimum wage here in the province?
Right now, it's $12.15 an hour. April 1st, we will get a 10-cent an hour consumer price index increase, and then another 25 cents was scheduled on top of that. So April 1st, we will go up to $12.50 an hour. And then October 1st, there will be another 25 cents added, and that will bring us to $12.75 an hour. And then after that, the current government is only committed to consumer price index increases, which is problematic because if we didn't have these other increases, all that minimum wage workers would have got over last year is a 10-cent increase. And if for the past 20 years, all we had done was CPI increases, today's minimum wage would be about $8 an hour. So CPI increase.
So how long would it take if we just continued the current practice? How long would it take to get to $15 on your estimate to an hour?
Oh my gosh, it would take a number of years.
Okay.
Because like I say, this year, the CPI increase would have brought about a 10-cent increase, right? And we're sitting at $12.15, so it would have brought us to $12.25. So, just going with inflation increases, I mean, we're usually somewhere around 2% each year in inflation. So that would be the increase of the minimum wage, right? So it wouldn't be the 4 increases. Just to clarify, Section 30 of the Labor Standards Act requires that the government review minimum wage every 2 years. So they last reviewed it in 2019, and they got to review it again this year. But they were committed to just the CPI increases, but they say they had these 4 increases, an extra dollar, because they wanted to come closer to the other Atlantic provinces. Well, we're ahead of New Brunswick, but we still lag behind Nova Scotia, PEI, and Quebec. So
is $15 an hour an actual living wage? Would be living wage in this province?
No, we take some criticism from the left on that front, that $15 is not enough to live on. It's not a living wage. So for the folks who aren't familiar with that term, a living wage is a minimum wage that's based on the cost of living. So they would determine a basket of goods and services that they would then, use to determine, what wage would you need to afford that basket of goods and services.
Right.
And so the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives in 2019 did a study on St. John's alone, and they determined then that a living wage in St. John's would be $18.85 an hour. I've looked at their estimates across other cities across the country, and that seems to be in line with, places that are kind of the same cost of living as here. So even $15 an hour is going to be, less than a living wage. But the thing is, governments are very, very adept at dragging out any kind of discussion that's complicated like that, like determining, this basket of goods and services, which is why we're saying our policy or our campaign is $15 an hour right away, or as soon as possible, index that to inflation as a good first step toward a living wage. So we're a living wage campaign, but step 1 is $15 an hour. Right now, somebody working full-time for minimum wage is going to earn about just over $25,000 a year. This would bring them to over $31,000 a year, if I'm not mistaken. So it just lifts them just like a tad above the poverty line for a single person.
So what are some of the consequences of our current low minimum wage, like what we have now, for a person, for an average person?
Right. So this is something that, oddly enough, the government is looking at. For one, there would be health consequences, because one of the things that we know is that you take a person, like say a single person in St. John's right now, working 40 hours a week for minimum wage, they would spend 60% of their take-home pay on rent of an average 1-bedroom apartment in St. John's. That's double the 30% benchmark that most people use to determine what you should be paying for shelter costs. So if you don't pay your rent, you get evicted. If you don't pay your heat and lights, they get cut off. One thing you do have some wiggle room with is what you eat. And so if you talk to food insecurity people in the province, they will tell you that A, we have the highest food insecurity rates in the country. B, the number 1 cause of food insecurity is income. And C, the majority of food insecure people in this province depend on employment income. So there's one of the consequences, is food insecurity. And food insecurity and income are income is the biggest social determinant of health. So when we look at our healthcare expenditures in this province, we spend more per capita in this province than any other province. And we have the worst outcomes of any other province in this province. So we spend the most per capita and we have the worst results of it. And one of those reasons, the biggest reason for that, is income. Now, it's not just minimum wage, it's also our income support levels below all 3 national poverty benchmarks. I mean, there's other sources of poverty as well, but this is part of it, and an important part of it, especially for so many people. So we're paying more in healthcare costs because of our low minimum wage. That's one thing right there. And our food insecurity has a lot to do with that. And I know the church is very involved in food banks. The majority of food insecure people in this province do not avail of a food bank. So it's not a good thing. Plus, there's more dependence on other social support programs and things like that, because people they need help to make ends meet. And also there are people choosing not to work and to be on social assistance, because at $12.15 an hour, it makes absolutely no economic sense to work. So we're paying one way or the other, but who should pay
Right.
for the labor?
Right. You mentioned just now about some don't avail of food banks. Can you say a little bit more about that? In what ways that they just don't meet the criteria that of food banks or?
I'm not the expert in that area. That's just something that I've learned from Food First to now.
Okay.
That there are like a significant number of food insecure people who don't go to the food banks. I'm just speculating now, maybe because there's not one in their area. It may be because of the stigma of going to it. So yeah, it's not meeting the needs of everybody. I learned this firsthand during the early days of the lockdown when I was doing some mutual aid. So yeah.
Right, and of course, you know, as you said, the consequences is not just for insecurity, but people could actually lose their homes if they can't pay their rent. I mean, they could be literally kicked out because they can't pay the rent because of the situation. And with the lockdown, would you say that certainly essential workers on the front lines in grocery stores and retail stores, which have to stay open, I guess they're predominantly minimum wage. Is that correct?
Well, they're at least low wage.
Low
There's
wage,
nobody there
okay.
making a good wage. But yeah, a lot of them are minimum wage, and right now they're terrified. And they can't afford to say no, you know, like they don't want to lose their job, or they can't afford to give up the little income that they do get. But I'm hearing from a lot of them that they're terrified. And I don't think their employers are protecting them as much as they can. So yeah.
Well, I'm the designated person that has to get groceries now in this house, because so I go when required. And I spoke to the cashier at a grocery store that I go to, and she expressed her concern. And this was a grocery store that had positive cases of COVID at the time, and I didn't get into it about the details, but I could get a sense from our conversation and her voice that she was genuinely worried that of having to go to work, but yet if she didn't, she wouldn't be paid. She would not be able to get her wage because of this concerns. I mean, I have the ability and luxury now to work from home because that's the mandate that I have as bishop to the diocese. I said, if we can work from home, but not everybody can do that. And I think that's important for us to realize that when we go to grocery stores or these essential services, that some of these wonderful people don't have the luxury that I currently have to just stay home and still get paid. So I think that's important to recognize in this conversation. So I'm a bishop, but I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Right.
If you don't mind. So why not, instead of increasing the minimum wage, why not lower the tax burden on minimum wage workers?
Okay, so we'd be talking about the provincial taxes because minimum wage is a provincial jurisdiction. And right now, a minimum wage worker is paying very little. Like a full-time minimum wage worker would be paying very little on tax. If I remember correctly, because I wrote a letter in the Telegram on this, that I think the low income tax reduction really eliminates the taxes on the first $21,000 of income on a single person. So so I looked at it, I crunched the numbers, and if we increase that to completely remove the provincial tax burden from them, it would work out to maybe $50 every 2 weeks on their paycheck. And that would come at a significant cost to the provincial treasury, because of course they're foregoing some tax income there. And on the other hand, a $15 minimum wage would come at very little. It depends on how much help the government would give to small business, but it would come at virtually no cost to the province, and it would put just over $150 every 2 weeks on their paycheck. So the tax reduction thing, that I get that all the time from people. When I looked at the numbers, it would be ineffective and expensive to the treasury.
And of course, reducing the tax burden means everybody pays for, all taxpayers would have to pay for that to meet the deficit. That's that right? Or
Yeah, absolutely.
right. So, okay, so let's talk, I mean, this may be okay. I know in some research, I know that larger companies and corporations that employ minimum wage, they're all for this. They're all for minimum wage because they have larger, means and a larger pool of resources to do this. But what about like the corner store, the small business in this province? What would be the impact on our small businesses if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour today?
Okay, well, there's a number of aspects to this question, because yes, nobody's going to feel sorry for the big chains and all of that kind of stuff, which is just under half of our minimum wage workers. But just under half would be working for small businesses, right? So businesses with 100 or less. And then, of course, we can talk about micro businesses that have like 20 or less. So one of the things that we know from other jurisdictions that have done this is there's benefits to businesses. They save in retraining costs because they don't have they have much less worker turnover. They have higher productivity. They have better customer service experiences, lower staff absenteeism, and they have more people apply for the jobs when those jobs become open. So there is some savings to businesses, so much so that our opponents, in their submission to the Minimum Wage Review Committee, they wanted a lower minimum wage by $1 an hour for new hires. So they basically admitted that there is a cost to hiring new workers, and that cost would be greatly reduced if you had a higher minimum wage because you wouldn't have the worker turnover. So that's one part of it. The other part would be, we estimate that in this province, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 minimum wage with something like $65 million in the hands of our lowest income earners, who will spend it there. They don't have the Cayman Island bank accounts. They would be spending it here in the local economy. And that would also benefit, the smaller businesses as well. And when we look at, and I'm starting to say this more now because, like, I can list off American cities that have at least a $15 minimum wage. It started with New York, moved to Seattle, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, San Jose, and some other countries. The state of California now, I believe, is at $15 an hour. So if these were decimating small businesses, why are more people jumping on the bandwagon? And then it went to Alberta. And so Rachel Notley's NDP government increased it to $15 in just over 3 years. So it was 3 consecutive years of significant minimum wage increases to get to $15 an hour. Now, the C.D. Howe Institute said, there could be tens of thousands of job losses because of this. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business went even further, said could be over 100,000 jobs lost because of this. And in fact, in the food service and accommodation sector in Alberta, in each of those 3 years, they added jobs. So Jason Kenney, who I don't think anybody thinks is a fan of a $15 minimum wage, he was very against it when it came in. And when he came to power, how come he didn't get rid of it if it was decimating small businesses and causing mass layoffs? Because it wasn't. And he knew he couldn't kill that policy because it was popular, because it worked. And so that's what I would say, that it hasn't had that result in any other place. So I don't think it would have that result here. But we are in the age of COVID, and this has been hard on small businesses. And I'm a huge fan of small businesses in this province. That's how I think we should be building our economy for some resilience. And so I've always advocated that government should, because we're advocating for getting to $15 an hour quickly, that the government should at least come up with some sort of temporary tax credit to ease the transition for the small businesses. And I've also had small businesses say to me that it's not that they're opposed to paying such a wage to their employees, but everybody has to do it. They can't do it and their competitor doesn't. So the legislated $15 minimum wage would actually help them because they're all on the level playing field.
You mentioned a bit earlier about, there's, people actually want less, so a sub minimum wage, which is that allowed? Is that illegal? Or are there
Oh, yeah.
workers now that are not making even minimum wage?
In our province, workers who wouldn't be earning minimum wage would be earning less, would be like your Uber Eats or whatever, these food delivery app drivers. They're not employees, they're contractors, so they don't have to be paid according to minimum wage. When we look at other jurisdictions, there's jurisdictions that have like people who serve alcohol and get tips. They have a lower minimum wage so that because they're putting the tips on that, right? There's a lot of problems with that. Then also there are like Alberta, Kenny did bring out a teenager wage. So if you're a high school student in Alberta, you get less. You can be paid less than another worker, you know. So, and like I say, in this province, they ask for the tip, the liquor server, lower minimum wage of $1.50 an hour less, and a new higher minimum wage of $1 an hour less for the first 500 hours of employment. So it is happening in a couple of other jurisdictions. BC right now has the tip liquor server lower wage, but June 1st, when they go to 15 to 20 an hour, they're getting rid of it. They will just have, that's the minimum wage, that's that. So
when I was a teenager many years ago, I worked minimum wage. I did minimum wage summer jobs and did that. So why is there this conception that minimum wage just is for kids at a high school or university? Is that realistic? Like how many current people would you estimate in this province who are on minimum wage are actually adults who are working not just summer jobs or jobs that they need to live on?
The majority of our minimum wage workers are 20 years of age or older. And when I say the majority, like the overwhelming majority, it is a minority that are the teenage workers. When I was a kid, you didn't see grown-ups, like older people working in McDonald's. Now you do, because the economy is very different, right? So that kind of view of minimum wage workers probably was more accurate when I was a lad than it is today, right? Even the person that delivers the newspaper is an adult now, when that was always a teenager back then. So the face of the workforce has very much changed over the past 20 years. But I can give you the actual exact numbers if I had a second to pull out the stats. Sure. Anybody could go and look at it, by the way, on the Newfoundland and Labrador Statistics Agency site. They list actually the breakdown of minimum wage workers. The last year they got up there, when I last looked, was 2019, and they also do a breakdown of low wage workers. So
there's a relevant question here from Derek Sullivan and about the economy and the effect of minimum wage. He says that California and Alberta were already strong economies when this minimum wage increase came into effect. And so, Mark, he would like to know if you know of any research that shows what such an increase does to, say, a struggling or a weaker economy.
I think one of the things, I know what Dr. Sean Cadigan, who has done research on the impact of the oil industry, for example, on employment in this province. And he found in some of his research, and my apologies to him if I'm not nailing this, but that most of the jobs that were created out of the oil boom were not those $100,000 oil industry jobs. The vast majority of them were in the low wage, minimum wage sector, like food services and accommodation, retail and wholesale, all of that kind of stuff. So if you take, and like I said earlier, that it's a 25, it's 23% of our workforce. So you'd be putting a lot of money in the hands of a significant portion of our workforce. So it would have a benefit on our struggling economy. I don't have, off the top of my head, I can't say of a study that I know that specifically deals with that, although I could probably go and take some time to look for one. And Alberta, keep in mind, like, because sometimes they'll say, well, there was this job loss in Alberta when the minimum wage went down and stuff like that. Yeah, because the oil price went down 50% a barrel, right, during this period of time. So in their higher end jobs, they probably lost jobs, but in this particular sector, they didn't. They increased jobs. So I can't really answer that very well because I don't have a study that talks about that, but I can see the sense of why it would benefit an economy. Because right now, if you take big chains that pay minimum wage, but those profits of those chains is leaving the province, right? But if you put more money in the hands of the workers, that money's staying in the province. So that can't help but, or that can't hurt our economy, that can only help it. And if you take a business like Costco, which pays their staff very, very well, above a living wage, they're leaving a lot of money. They make a lot of profit here, but they leave a lot of money here too, and well-paid workers with benefits and everything. So at a time when our economy can use like all hands on deck, this is something that should be part of a recovery plan.
So we here, and I think we have the highest unemployment rate in the country. Is that correct? Is that true? Or maybe we're very high. I know that our unemployment rate is pretty high.
We are exceptionally high.
So would a $15 minimum wage lead to more job losses?
It hasn't in other places. I know Seattle, like their restaurant industry, actually increased jobs after they increased their minimum wage. And like I've already pointed out, Alberta's experience in that very intense 3-year period. They added jobs each of those 3 years. And I read another study who dealt with the idea that if, like, just take restaurants, for example, if they have to pay a higher minimum wage, maybe their staff would get less hours and stuff like that. And there was an average drop of 1 hour a week, just under 1 hour a week. But, more than compensated by the jump in minimum wage. So, and then the only studies I've seen that show like negative job impact was a couple that show there is some negative impact on teen employment because of the fact that, well, certainly if you have to pay $15 an hour to your worker, and you can have an experienced worker, or you can hire somebody who's in, grade 11, you may want to go with the mature worker, right? So it's about 10%, I think, in this study that I looked at, there was a 10% drop in teen employment. But overall employment, there wasn't a drop.
I also think, because I know we avail of it in the diocese in many instances, that there's actually government grants for summer students that adults wouldn't get, that would help offset people that want to hire young people for, because it's the constant refrain, you need more experience in order to get this job, but I know the government, provides, these summer student grants that you can use and utilize, which certainly subsidizes from the diocese perspective and parishes to have summer students come in to help out and to gain that experience and that thing on their resume.
Yeah.
Mark, I know you're passionate about this. I can sense this and many of our conversations but I also know, you're a Christian. And you're a priest. So from both perspectives, as a community organizer, as a Christian, as a priest, what would you say to the church? What, if anything, do you think the church should be doing when it comes to this issue?
Well, we as Anglicans, as Canadian Anglicans, we have one of the vows we make in our baptismal covenant is to strive for justice among all people and to respect the dignity of every human being. And as you pointed out earlier, this is an issue of justice. And I feel also this is an issue of human dignity. There's no dignity in living in poverty. It's not a dignified existence. And so my word to the church would be, my hope for the church would be that we would show leadership on this, that we would lead by example, that we, as far as the diocese is concerned, would have a policy that no one in the diocese, no employee would be paid less than $15 an hour. And that all of our employees, whether they're clergy or ordained, would get a cost of living increase that we give to clergy every year, that we would treat all of our employees the same. And I know in the past it's given to the clergy, but it's recommended for other staff, but it should just be for staff, whether they're lay or ordained. But nobody should work for less than $15 an hour, and that should be indexed to inflation like we do with clergy salaries. And not to do this in a kind of judgmental way, because there are businesses out there, employers out there who need it to be legislated in order to do it. Some would even welcome it being legislated in order to do it. But we're in a position, I think, that we could just do it because it is the right thing to do. It is treating our workers with dignity. And then, we should encourage other businesses who can do the same to do the same, rather than wait for government all the time. I think we can show some moral leadership based on our baptismal covenant and our Christian values. So, I know that's a hot potato these days, but I throw that to you, Bishop. I really feel that this would be an opportunity for the church to say, not only do we believe this is the right thing, we're doing this right thing.
Well, thank you for that. Of course, I can't make the decision unilaterally here tonight, but I certainly know that it is part of our baptismal covenant to respect the dignity of all human beings. And when people live in poverty, and if they're in the employ of a diocese or the church, then I don't know if that's exactly living out that baptismal covenant by respecting their human dignity. Mark, where can we find more about your campaign? Is there a website? Where do we turn to learn a little bit more?
The best thing is to follow us on either Facebook or Twitter or both, because that's what we keep updated. We're constantly putting out information there. So you can find us on Facebook on 15. Let me just tell you exactly what. I don't know if we have the Fight for 15 or, Fight for 15 in Fairness Newfoundland and Labrador is our Facebook page. And then our Twitter account is at 15 in Fairness NL. I think both those ways are the best way to follow what we're doing, any activities, any advocacy that we're doing that people can get involved with, they could do it through that. We do have a website, but that's not, really updated all that much. But people can also reach out to me through the Twitter or Facebook, and if they have particular questions, and I would help them out with that. So that's on Twitter at 15 in Fairness NL, and like I say, Fight for 15 in Fairness Newfoundland and Labrador on Facebook.
And obviously you're a friendly, familiar face to Anglicans in this diocese. I know you're going to be speaking, I think, next week at one of our parishes, and I think Holy Innocents Paradise. Is that coming up, or?
No, that was last night.
Oh, last night. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So if any parish or average Anglican wants to learn a little bit more, they can certainly reach out to you directly.
They absolutely can. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Mark, I really appreciate this. You've opened my eyes. You've certainly educated me in terms of what your campaign is about, the benefits that it would provide to minimum wage workers. We still have a ways to go, according to what you're saying. I think we need to start at a number that is certainly more than where we are now, obviously, and because essentially, if you are in a minimum wage position, you're actually in a poverty position. You're not actually able to live fully. So you have to make decisions about your life, not your lifestyle, but basic necessities like what food you can eat and where you can live. And from my perspective, that goes against, from my understanding of the values of the kingdom of God, of equitableness and the ability for all to be equal in one another. Is there anything else you want to add or say before we wrap up?
I would just say I mean, I know we have widespread support for this in the province. The overwhelming majority of citizens support this. And I would just ask people who do support this to make some noise about it with their MHA. Like if their MHA sees you coming, they should turn the other way because they know you're going to give them an earful about a $15 minimum wage. The more that we do that, the more uncomfortable we make the politicians, the more likely it is they're going to actually deal with this issue because they've been putting it off, you know, for a long time.
Sort of like the guy I heard about who went into a church and overturned the temple, the tables. And there was
yes, time for some tables.
I read that somewhere. I'm good.
Sounds
I'm
familiar.
Joking, I just want to, and I thank you so much. And I thank Rob for putting this together. And my hope is that this will be a regular series for me to learn a little bit more about what's going on in our communities around various organizations and partnerships. That we have many partnerships in the diocese that we are proud of, that we support. But it doesn't mean that there are others that we can't listen to and learn from. And a big part of this is just for me for education, and having it on this forum is to allow others to listen in, to learn a little bit more themselves, and to find ways in which, I don't expect everybody to agree with what we're talking about here tonight, but yet at least they can certainly hear your side and this side of the argument. And they're certainly free to reach out to me if they have the other side. I mean, that's what it's all about. This is about a conversation with the bishop. It's not a one-way conversation. There are many, many conversations that are going around. But I'm very thankful to you both here tonight, and you, Mark, for coming on board and being the first, I hope, of many for this event. I just want to end, if it's okay, with a prayer. This is something that I found from the website socialjusticeresourcecenter.org, and it has a lot to do with work and labor and fairness. And I offer this prayer tonight as we end our session. Loving, working God, today we ask your special blessing on all people who labor, either for pay or as volunteers, in jobs or at school, in the workplace or at home, here in this province and around the world. We pray especially for your blessings on workers who do not have jobs, and for those whose inadequate pay does not allow them to live the full life you intend for each of us. Creator God, help us to build a new world in the midst of the old, a world where all workers are valued, a world where those who clean houses are also able to buy houses to live in, a world where those who grow food can also afford to eat it, a world where those who serve and care for others are themselves also served and cared for. We pray for the coming of a world where all workers everywhere share in the abundance that you have given us. And we ask these things knowing that you give us the courage and the strength to live. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
So thank you, guys. Rob, is there anything we need to do?
Nope. I was just going to remind people that who may be just tuning in right now, still feel free to make comments, ask questions, and all three of us will keep an eye on this conversation. And so if there's anything that we need to respond to, we'll make sure that we respond to it. Bishop, we just want to thank you for your time as well and making yourself available for this kind of conversation. And we do look forward to more conversations in the future.
So do I. Thank you so much. God bless you both and stay safe.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Peace.